I'll just be real brief. Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis. I haven't read a whole lot about it. I just watched a lot of videos, including yours and Lindsay Nicole. I'm sure you know who she is, right?
Of course, of course.
No? Of course you do. Yeah. Anyway, but I never hear like a cross reference. They're kind of similar, right? They're more primitive. Both are more primitive than what you would expect in the timeline. You would expect them to be more highly evolved. Both are tiny. Are they the same critter? they're both descended from Homo erectus, right?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question, Bill. So there's the reason why they're typically talked about together is exactly what you just said, right? They sort of break the mold as to what we expect from late genus Homo, despite the fact that they're living like in the Pleistocene at the tail end of the evolution of our genus, where basically everything's got a big brain and is tools and is living at these all across the world, right? In the likes of the East Asian archaics and Neanderthals and Denisovans and all good stuff. Floresiensis and Naledi are weird. They both have these teeny tiny little brains. Floresiensis is a lot smaller than Homo naledi was, and also lived a lot later than Homo naledi did. Right. So the dates for Homo floresiensis are like within the past 100,000 years for extinction, whereas Naledi goes extinct, or at least we lose it in the fossil record like 250,000 years ago. So no, I don't think they're the same critter. I also don't think that they both descended from Homo erectus. And Matt Tochiri, who's done a lot of work on Homo floresiensis, proposes actually that, like, so this is kind of weird, but Homo floresiensis has some aspects to it, including some of its carpals, that look more Australopith-like. It doesn't look like Homo erectus, and it would be very unlikely for Homo erectus to lose these characters after evolving out east and then regain them in the likes of Homo floresiensis. That doesn't seem very likely to me. What that would suggest, of course, is kind of insane, but it would suggest that either you've got a late surviving branch of Homo habilis that also leaves Africa, or an earlier branch of Homo habilis, or even an Australopith that leaves and eventually makes it to colonize the island of Flores and the rest of Indonesia. If you look at Homo luzonensis, which is similarly dwarfed. Homo naledi is a different story. Homo naledi probably does descend from Homo erectus, or maybe an earlier hominin. And for whatever reason, it seems to have just never really busted through that gray ceiling. Early members of Homo erectus have brain case sizes that are around what we see for Homo naledi, so that's not particularly unusual. But naledi maintains all of these like apish characteristics in its arms and in its brain case size, brain case organization, relative prognathism. It's got modern looking teeth and hands, but its pelvis is still really weird. I think what's happening in Homo floresiensis is not, or in Homo naledi, excuse me, is not unlike what you see in floresiensis, in that you're looking at this isolated hominin that seems to just be making it work, right? Like it's not that it dwarfs its brain necessarily, probably a little bit in floresiensis with island dwarfism, but there's just no pressure to grow a larger brain case size. They're eking out a niche just as well as every other hominin that it's sharing the world with, and it's doing it just fine with being a pinhead, right? Like it shows us that there's not one way to be human, and indeed there's no trajectory that ultimately terminates in a big brained member of genus Homo. You just don't need it, which is crazy to think about, but pretty cool. So no, to answer your question, they both have their own autapomorphies. So you can, if you pick up a skull of Naledi, and I've got them in the back, but I'm not going to like lumber back there and get them. If you have Naledi and you have Homo floresiensis and you look at them side by side, you can tell the difference. There are telltale characteristics in the crania of both, in the teeth of both, in the hands of both, in the rib cage of both, in the vertebral column of both, and so on and so forth. They're different things, which makes it even cooler, because that means this exact type of small-brained member of genus Homo works well enough that it happened twice in two different parts of the world. And so while Neanderthalensis is innovating and Denisovans is innovating and the East Asian archaics are innovating and Homo sapiens is innovating, these guys are just happy doing it the way they're doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And certainly in Floresiensis, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, case, it is probably island dwarfism and island isolation. But with Naledi, what is there some hypothesis about why they became so isolated?
I mean, they're living down there in South Africa. Odds are, from what we know about how these migrations tend to happen, because this is my opinion. There are two hypotheses about where genus Homo starts, but I think you can provide pretty good support for the one that I hold for that's why I hold it, right? But you see the emergence of genus Homo in East Africa, in Eastern Africa, and then that area that connects Eastern Africa to South Africa, it pulses much like the Sahara does, where it'll be green and then it'll be desert, and then it'll be green and then it'll be desert. And we call these green highways. And so when this area is lush, hominins in East Africa can make their way down to South Africa. Naturally, that's the direction they're going to go. They're not going to go north up through the Sahara unless it's also green. And then they populate South Africa and do well there. You see the emergence of Paranthropus first in East Africa, then it pops up in South Africa. Australopithecus shows up in East Africa, then it shows up in South Africa. Homo shows up in East Africa, then it shows up in South Africa. So I think this is my pet theory, right, is that you have something like Homo habilis in East Africa. It's minding its own business. It's doing its thing. A group breaks off and makes it to South Africa. That green highway dries up. Now it's isolated. And it just continues to thrive down there. And for whatever reason, if you're not continuing to refresh this population of paranthropines and other members of genus Homo, it's going relatively uncontested. But even with Homo sapiens and Paranthropus there, it's got no competition for the niche that it's filling. Homo sapiens is doing something completely different than Homo naledi. It's exploiting completely separate resources. Paranthropus is a big cow ape. It's eating grass and it's robustus. It's Paranthropus robustus down there in South Africa at this time. But none of these guys are going to be directly competing with Homo naledi. So my thinking is that it probably got down there, evolved its own little niche, right? Filling its own little niche there. Niche, whatever. I say it different every time. And then as these other hominins come in and fill out these areas, fill out this ecosystem, they're not clashing. And clearly, Homo naledi is not an absolute idiot, right? Like, it's still pretty intelligent. It's still doing some intelligent things. I don't think that all those bodies got into that cave on their own. They're the only thing down there. It's a really weird deal. I don't think they're burying their dead either, but to me, they certainly seem competent enough to throw their dead into a pit to keep them from stinking up their living space. So I'm just trying to emphasize and impart on you that it's like the way that evolution works isn't with a terminal end in mind, right? It works with what it's got, and whatever Homo naledi was doing was good enough for the living that it was making there in South Africa around Denaledi.
Okay, all right, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
We're going to find out more about this, though. Lieberger's team is promising that they've got new cool stuff on the horizon, as they always are. So I'm sure they're going to come out next and say Naledi's doing some other cool, crazy stuff down there, and people are going to be mad about it, and then we're going to argue about it for a decade, and it'll be great.
Yeah, the cave may have been different when Naledi was alive, right? Than it is now. It kind of may have shifted around and became more difficult to access the caverns or whatever.
Let me tell you, Bill, at the AABAs a couple years ago, there was a poster that was presented there. And usually posters get presented, and then the next year they end up there as some kind of talk, and then they end up getting published. That's a classic sort of line of like steps in the evolution of your manuscript. There was a paper at the AABAs a couple years ago that was specifically on the geologic reworking of the Denaledi cave system. That was specifically what it was on. Now, Berger's team says this cave has not been reworked. But my understanding is they don't have all that many geologists on that team, and it is a really weird, like, limestone style cave. So I think that we are going to eventually find out that there's been some reworking on this cave. Now, what that looks like, I have no idea. I'm not a geologist, but I remember finding that poster compelling, and I think it offers a really great explanation for how you're getting only Homo naledi in this cave system and like a baboon tooth and nothing else. A predator cache doesn't do that, right? A flood doesn't do that either. A flood doesn't sort by individual. Was Homo naledi using fire and like trussing up their dead in cordage and like taking this hour-long journey that we can barely take with all of our modern technology to get back here so that they can dig a hole and put their dead in it and then bury it? I don't think so. I don't think that burden of proof has been met. After reading all of the reviews of folks who really know what they're talking about, I don't think that's been met. But were they chunking their dead into a hole because they smelled bad? Maybe. They could have even been doing it because it was like a mild, level of spirituality, if you want to call it that, right? Like we know Neanderthals had some level of appreciation or reverence for the dead, given they were certainly dug holes and stuck them in it and buried them. Which is a different, typically anthropologically in an archaeological sense, you parse that out as something that's very different from just disposing of it. Ants can dispose of their dead. Putting them in a hole and putting dirt on top of it tends to imply some kind of greater level of thought. Does that mean they believed in God? I don't know. Like, does it mean they would just have reverence for their dead? I'm not sure. Right? Like, I don't think you can say they had religion or anything like that, but it certainly implies a greater level of thought. I don't think that's what Naledi was doing. I think they were chucking their dead in a hole. And I think that the more we learn about the geology of that system, the more is going to come out about that. But, that's just my layman perspective. I don't study burials.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bill. I love monologuing about my opinions on Homo naledi, and I rarely get the opportunity here online. So thank you.
You're
Take
welcome.
care.
Okay, you guys take
All
care.
right.
Thanks,
Dang
Bill.
it. I do this every time. Okay, Paul, I've got one for you now. I'm going to
Uh-oh.
let I have to
I
get
just
some more
got a
water in
free
my.
education. I'm very delighted.
Oh, please. Don't flatter me, Paul. Don't you flatter me on air. Come on.
I flatter you when you're not even here.
Yeah, whatever. I'm giving you the next call.